Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. We're going to start in Europe. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is heading into the Munich Security Conference with a deliberately packed schedule. He's set to meet U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines. That combination alone tells you what Berlin is trying to be right now: the connective tissue between Washington, Beijing, and Kyiv, even when those relationships are under real strain. German officials are signaling that Merz's opening speech will directly address great power competition and what they describe carefully as strained transatlantic relations. The key update here is tone. Berlin is explicitly pushing back on the idea that Europe should emotionally or strategically write off the US, even amid friction with the Trump administration. This isn't dramatic diplomacy, but it is steady-state crisis management. Germany is positioning itself as the place where conversations still happen, even when everyone else is yelling past each other. Now let's shift back to China, because while Europe is trying to keep things stitched together, Beijing is tightening screws and doing it across multiple fronts at once. You heard us talk yesterday about Jimmy Lai and the 20-year sentence handed down in Hong Kong. The update today isn't the sentence itself, it's what came immediately after. Beijing followed the ruling by releasing a formal policy white paper asserting that the central government has a fundamental responsibility for safeguarding national security in Hong Kong. The language matters. This wasn't defensive. It framed the national security law as a stabilizing success and described the law as a legal shield that restored order. Hong Kong's chief executive John Lee welcomed the document, saying authorities must stay vigilant. At the same time, China's Ministry of National Security doubled down publicly, describing the trial as open, evidence-based, and fully compliant with the rule of law. They dismissed foreign criticism as hypocrisy and political manipulation. So if yesterday was the hammer, today was the plaque explaining why the hammer exists. International reactions stayed consistent. U.S. lawmakers, the UK, the EU, Australia, Japan, and Taiwan all criticized the sentence, but nothing moved beyond statements. And that's the quiet update here. Beijing is clearly calculating that it can absorb the diplomatic blowback without cost. The ambiguity around press freedom in Hong Kong is gone. What remains is enforcement. That enforcement model shows up even more clearly when you look at Taiwan. On Tuesday, Beijing held its annual Taiwan Work Conference, which is basically where the Chinese Communist Party lays out its priorities for pressure on Taipei. Wang Huning, the party's fourth-ranked leader and ideological heavyweight, said China will firmly support patriotic, pro-reunification forces inside Taiwan and strike hard against what it calls separatists. This language is familiar, but the update is how directly it's now paired with military messaging. China's defense ministry followed up the same day, warning that if Taiwan's armed forces provoke conflict, they would be wiped out. That phrasing isn't subtle, and it's not aimed at Taiwan alone. It's meant for audiences in Washington, Tokyo, and Canberra who are watching how far Beijing is willing to go rhetorically. This lines up with what the PLA has been doing in practice. You may remember we talked recently about China's Justice Mission exercises around Taiwan back in late December. New details continue to underscore how aggressive those maneuvers were. PLA J-16 fighter jets fired decoy flares at Taiwanese F-16s during close intercepts. In another encounter, a Chinese jet maneuvered directly behind a Taiwanese aircraft in what pilots described as a firing position. There was also a tactic where fighters flew tucked under H-6K bombers to hide from radar before revealing missiles at close range. This isn't routine harassment. It's intimidation designed to raise risk without technically crossing a red line. And analysts are increasingly connecting this behavior to instability inside China's own military leadership. Ongoing purges have left senior command positions in flux, and when political loyalty becomes the primary performance metric, operational professionalism can suffer. That's when miscalculation creeps in. But the most important update on Taiwan isn't about jets. It's about law and pressure on civilians. Throughout 2025, reported cases of Taiwanese citizens being detained or restricted in mainland China jumped sharply. What's changed is how openly Beijing is now simulating criminal prosecutions of people who don't even live under its jurisdiction. One of the clearest examples involved Taiwanese legislator and civil society figure Puma Shen, accused of secession for his activism and research. Chinese authorities named police organs and hinted at international pursuit, despite having no legal pathway to enforce it. The point isn't enforcement, it's deterrence. Beijing is trying to make Taiwanese identity itself feel legally risky. All of this feeds into what analysts are calling a functional quarantine of Taiwan. In late December, China coordinated PLA aircraft, Navy ships, Coast Guard vessels, and maritime safety authorities around the island. Rocket artillery launched from Fujian crossed into Taiwan's 24 nautical mile contiguous zone for the first time. Temporary airspace restrictions disrupted civilian flights. None of this required a declaration of war. It normalized disruption instead. Taiwan's limited LNG reserves mean sustained pressure on shipping and insurance markets can have outsized effects. The strategy isn't invasion, it's exhaustion. Let's pivot north to Russia, because while China is mastering gray zones, Moscow is doing something more traditional and arguably more predictable. Estonia's Foreign Intelligence Service released an assessment stating that Russia is not planning to attack a NATO country this year or next. That's the good news. The update, and it's a big one, is what Russia is doing instead. Moscow is rapidly expanding ammunition production, stockpiling for future conflicts while sustaining operations in Ukraine. The goal, according to Estonian intelligence, is to delay Europe's rearmament and prevent European states from being able to act independently within the next 2 to 3 years. Russia is also signaling openness toward Washington, clearly hoping political changes in the U.S. might lead to eased sanctions or a settlement that locks in Ukraine's defeat. But Estonia is blunt. Russia's core objective hasn't changed since the Cold War: marginalize NATO, weaken the U.S. role in Europe, and rewrite the security order on Moscow's terms. China features in this picture too, as both a geopolitical partner and an energy backstop if Taiwan-related sanctions ever hit. Speaking of China thinking globally, let's check in on the Western Hemisphere. Panama's Supreme Court recently voided port concessions held by a C.K. Hutchison subsidiary at both ends of the Panama Canal. That's a win for U.S. efforts to limit Chinese-linked control near one of the world's most important choke points. The update is what comes next. China's state-owned shipping giant COSCO is well-positioned to pursue port acquisitions elsewhere in Latin America and the Caribbean. Mexico, the Bahamas, and other locations that still provide leverage over regional trade routes. At the same time, Beijing offered support to Cuba amid a jet fuel shortage after Venezuelan shipments were blocked. China framed this as solidarity and opposition to foreign interference. It's also a reminder that Beijing is comfortable stepping into logistical gaps left by sanctions, especially when it strengthens ties with governments Washington would prefer to isolate. In the South China Sea, there's nothing new, but that's the problem. Chinese Coast Guard vessels continue to harass Philippine ships around Scarborough Shoal with water cannons, lasers, and boardings, despite a binding international ruling that invalidated China's claims years ago. The update here is political. The Philippine Senate formally condemned the Chinese embassy this week for attacking Philippine officials and reaffirmed the country's sovereign rights. Manila's patience is wearing thin. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.